To the Point with Michael Williams.
It's being called the Solar Energy Amendment, and it's becoming one of the hottest issues facing voters in November. The question, whether it will help or hurt the solar industry and you, the consumer, here in Florida. Good morning and welcome. It's Amendment 1 on your ballot. Some say it could determine the direction of the solar industry in our state for quite some time to come. We have a supporter and opponent here to discuss it. Joining me, Pamela Goodman, the Florida president of the League of Women Voters, strongly opposing it. We thank you for being with us. And Julio Fuentes, a member of the Consumers for Smart Solar, the group backing Amendment 1. We thank you both for being our guests today.
Thank you for having us.
Mr. Fuentes, we will begin with you. Amendment 1, in layman's terms, from your interpretation and from your prism, what does it say? What will it do from your perspective?
So, Amendment 1 simply does three important benefits to our Floridians in our state. The first is the benefits of consumer rights, the benefit of consumer protection, and consumer fairness. Those are the three areas where we break down kind of the terminology of what this really means.
What's it allow a consumer to do?
So it allows, if you are a consumer and you would like to purchase solar panels for your home or your place of business, you could go right ahead and do so. What this is saying is we're offering a benefit to the state to make sure that they are protected in a way to that there's no rip-offs or scam artists out there, proper installations of these solar panels, that these solar panels actually do work the way that they are supposed to work. So some type of protection for the consumer.
You said protection for the state.
For the consumer.
Okay. For the
state
consumer.
to protect the consumer, yes.
Net metering is a big concept. So I put the solar panels up. Can I sell my electricity back to the utility, FPL in this case, if I live down here?
Sure, sure. I mean, that's something that really works out here for one of the benefits here for Amendment 1.
If that's the case, then Pamela Goodman, why is the League of Women so much in opposition to Amendment 1, which I must say, Justice Barbara Pariente, in a dissenting opinion, called the language, quote, a wolf in sheep's clothing, saying it would allow utilities to raise fees on solar customers and was, quote, I'm quoting here, masquerading as a pro-solar energy initiative. So first of all, your take on what Amendment 1 says and would do effectively.
It's exactly, Michael, and I agree with most of what you say, because Amendment 1 essentially doesn't change very much in our Constitution. We already have the protection of government for consumers. We already have the right for individuals to install solar in the state of Florida. The real caveat is in the final sentence of the amendment. And it's the one that says it ensures consumers who don't install solar are not required to subsidize the cost created by those who do. And there are currently no subsidies created by the installation of solar. There are no inequalities.
So read us that part again, because that's been the nut of it. I want you at home to key in on this for discussion by both of you. Your concern boils down to, again, that's worth repeating.
The final sentence in the amendment that voters will be looking at on their ballot says, ensures consumers who don't install solar are not required to subsidize the cost created by those who do.
So in plain English, so Mr. Fuentes puts them on his roof and I don't. From your perspective, what happens to me? I said, I don't want him. He says he does. What happens to me?
Nothing. If anything, you may benefit. You may benefit because he's creating power that he's not taking from FPL, from one of the large, powerful utilities.
So why is that a bad thing then?
It's not. It's it's once again, it's the monopolies that are trying to protect their own profits.
In what way?
The fact that he will be able to sell the power back to them. They do not want people to be able to generate power for themselves, separate from the monopolies. And the monopolies, I have to say, this sounds like it is a citizen initiative. The people that put this amendment on the ballot were not citizens. They certainly are citizens of Florida, but this is backed with a $22 million bankroll by major utilities in this state, mainly FPL, Duke, the others. And why did they do that? And they have beautiful ads going right now, lovely, with the solar panels going up and senior citizens and help. If it's all that good, I always say follow the money trail. Why are they spending $22 to make sure that this amendment passes with these beautiful ads, but why do we not yet have solar anywhere. I see it not in my neighborhood. I don't see it and I travel the state of Florida, in very many places in this state.
You've unloaded a lot of concerns. Mr. Fuentes, weigh in on them one by one.
So that's an important point as far as the amount of money that has been raised and who has been contributing to this campaign, if you will. We report monthly, our expenses and who gives contributions to this cause. What scares us is who is funding the opposition on this. We understand that 90% of the money that is raised is from an out-of-state organizations that just does not want to disclose who is contributing to this opposition of this particular amendment. And it's interesting because this coalition is diverse. When we talk about citizens of the state, it's obviously the organization that I represent, the Florida State Hispanic Chamber of Commerce supports this, the Florida Black Chamber, NAACP.
Beyond the big money, though, before people head into that ballot box and early voting starts, it's upon us now. I wanted for a pocketbook point of view, the biggest reason why, as a pocketbook matter, for Floridians watching this who are debating, do I want to go solar or not? Why, from a pocketbook point of view, does it make sense in plain English?
From
a consumer pocketbook point of view, why does this make sense?
Well, it gives you protection as a consumer. If you do want to purchase solar panels for your home or your business again, you're free to do so. But this gives you more protection against bad players that are.
And specifically, what kind of protection?
Well, I mean, the big one.
Don't jump out of your chair.
The big one for me is the leasing part. Mm-hmm. Oh, there's two big ones. That is one of them. Companies that want to lease these solar panels to you, that for all intents and purposes, you will never own these panels. You'll never have the right to benefit any of the real benefits of solar and why you obtain solar for your home or your business.
Ms. Goodman's about to jump out of her chair. You were shaking your head vigorously about why it'll help and protect you in your pocketbook. Why not? We
already have those protections. That is, we are protected by government. We already have those protections. Look, I'm going to make what everyone says is a very complicated issue on this amendment. It is not complicated. It is simple. 19 editorial boards around the state that we have visited, every single one of them has said, vote no if you support solar for the state of Florida. Every single one. 175 organizations, yes. The gentleman has some very nice organizations like the NAACP and his own who support his point of view, but it has 175 organizations against a broad swath of political, solar, business, media, all say vote no on this amendment.
And because?
Because it does nothing to enhance the growth of solar, which Florida has the capability of being the third largest solar in our state. It currently ranks in the low 30s, and it does nothing to help expand.
It does nothing to help expand because the language ultimately, if perhaps inadvertently, would do what? Would
penalize solar customers and not allow them to be able to produce their own power.
And from your point of view, penalize them in what way?
By once again, the net metering, by allowing the utilities to be able to buy that, for them not to be able to sell that back to the power companies.
So in your mind, ultimately, Amendment 1 says, hey, I've got this, I want to sell it back to the grid, would not be able to.
That is correct.
Yeah. Now, our amendment preserves the government's existing role.
Well, she's point blank saying, and the critique has been about net metering, selling back to the grid, not going to work. How do you directly respond to that?
The Amendment 1 protects the role of the very system that has been put into place in metering here in Florida. It gives no new authority to government to have any influence on the future of solar. What we're basically saying is we don't want to make this, we all believe in solar, and solar is a good thing. We obviously live in the Sunshine State, but without a doubt, we don't want to make Florida the wild, wild west of solar without no kind of,
You're chuckling, Pamela?
Look, we are not the wild, wild west. Tuesday, a story broke that confirmed exactly what the 175 organizations that are saying vote no on solar have been saying all along. The story broke that an insider who really planned this for the monopolies in Florida.
From the James Madison Institute?
The James Madison Institute.
Of Tally?
Thank you, yes. That story broke that this was a planned amendment absolutely to deceive the voters. That word was used. It is fraud against the voters of Florida, is an extremely dangerous precedent by monopolies in the state of Florida to fool the voter. If you want expansion of solar in the state of Florida, vote no on 1. And that's the bottom line.
You're talking about the policy director of that think tank, who said, hired by Florida's largest electric utilities, I want you to answer this, Mr. Fuentes, said the industry attempted to deceive voters into supporting restrictions on the expansion of solar by shrouding Amendment 1 as a pro-solar amendment. Your direct response.
I personally was not at that event, and the organization Consumers for Smart Florida has come out with a statement that I could just read briefly. Consumers for Smart Solar has no knowledge of what JMI, James Madison Institute, is claiming. Nobody from JMI either participated in or was asked to participate in the planning or drafting of our amendment or campaign efforts, nor do we know the person who made these comments.
I want to take a brief pause to let both of you respond to the following. I happened to be at a rally last week, a Hillary Clinton rally, and one of the speakers, they made their focus, just to set this up for you at home at the University of Miami last week, to young people, and one of the issues they wanted to touch on was climate change. And within that, former Vice President Al Gore, one of the early authors on that topic and concern, brought up the issue of Amendment 1 in Florida and the upcoming vote, and here's what he had to say. Listen.
They are trying to fool you into amending your state constitution in a way that gives them the authority to shut down net metering and do in Florida what they did in Nevada and just kill the solar industry.
Al Gore, the former vice president, very adamant there. Again, just basically for people, net metering means what?
You could probably describe
net metering, just a simple layman's explanation.
That's a tough one for me to describe. I'm really not in the
But essentially it allows you to sell power back
to
Correct.
And he's saying that essentially would shut down that effort. It was very vehement. Your response, then yours.
It did. In Arizona, no regulations were in place, and solar was booming. And exactly what is in this amendment then got passed and has virtually put a stop, exactly what Mr. Gore said. I do want to clearly...
In your mind, it restricts the incentive for me to put solar at my home, or you, or my neighbor, or you.
Absolutely. I was listening to a talk show this morning, and a gentleman said, I have the signed papers on my desk ready to go. If this amendment passes, I'm tearing them up and throwing them away. I have the installer, I'm ready to go. If it does not pass, I'm putting solar panels on my roof the next day.
So it's interesting that you mentioned Arizona. Arizona, if you could, it's documented of all the issues that have been going on in Arizona because they do not have similar type of language as we have in Amendment 1 with the rip-offs, the scam offs.
The biggest issues, rip-offs, you think, and what else?
These leasing companies, you know, you're tied into a lease for your solar panels that'll tie you into these things forever, where at the end of the day, you're actually losing money instead of making money. That's the consumer protection part of it. The installation of these panels, there's really no proper direction on how to do so right now. Obviously, these are dangerous to neighbors, you know, neighborhoods, children that might be playing in homes or businesses that have them.
That sounds benign enough to have those protections. The concern,
which they don't have in Arizona.
Once again, we're already protected as consumers by
You're
the
arguing
government
we
for
don't
that.
need a Supreme Court approved constitutional amendment in the
no.
state of Florida to give the kind of protections that Mr. Fuentes argues about.
It's law. And Mr. Fuentes, actually, I'm surprised because what solar panels do and the expansion of solar in the state outside of the monopolies that are trying to control it and keep it close under their fist is actually expand jobs to exactly the organizations that you represent, being president of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, expands environmental concerns. It does all good. But this amendment does one thing and one thing only, and that is keeping money in the pockets of the monopolies of where it is now. And that's why it is so important to vote this amendment down. Vote no on 1, and let's make Florida the sunshine state that it should be.
And very briefly, do people say, why is the league so knee-deep diving all in on this one?
Thank you for asking that. We've had a longstanding position on environment, a longstanding position on renewable energy at the national level and at the state level. So we have been working on solar and other renewable energy avenues as well for the last many years.
Mr. Fuentes, you will have the final word as somebody who supports Amendment 1, your final word on why people should be heading to the ballot box and saying yes.
So it's interesting, as my hat that I wear as president of the Florida State Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and along with the many other organizations and chambers of commerce and pro-business type groups that support voting yes on Amendment 1, we're all about job creation, job growth. We're looking to attract more businesses into our state, and solar is obviously a big part of this growth. So without a doubt, we're not against solar because we've been getting way too many emails and Facebook posts about anti-solar, and that can't be further than the truth. What we're looking to do is protect our consumers, our Floridians that work hard for their money and should have a right to be protected by our government.
For and against Amendment 1, please read it closely. We know, again, early voting starting. You owe it to yourselves, of course, and we hope we can continue to help lay out the issues on this. And we'll be talking about more. We're talking about Amendment 2 at another broadcast. But we thank both of you for coming in and laying out your points of view. Mr. Fuentes, Pamela Goodman, thank you both for being our guest on To The Point. We appreciate it a great deal.
Pleasure always. Thank you.
Coming up, the subject of alleged voter fraud being raised. We have an election supervisor here to talk about the voting process.
I will totally accept the results of this great and historic presidential election if I win.
Donald Trump, the day after the third presidential debate, in which he, under repeated questioning, said, "I'll keep you in suspense," about whether he would concede the results of the election should he lose. Joining me now to discuss all of that and the broader challenge that Mr. Trump's been making on the campaign trail and others about the possibility of a rigged election. He says that at many campaign stops, I've heard it when I've covered him, others of his supporters raise similar concerns. And so our guest, a familiar face, Palm Beach County Supervisor of Elections, Susan Booker. Speak to this concern or charge, unsubstantiated by Mr. Trump thus far, about rigged elections. What about the concern?
I think that it's very frustrating for a candidate to be scaring our voters. You know, the equipment that the supervisors, the 67 supervisors in the state of Florida use is tested and certified by the Division of Elections at the Secretary of State's office. And after that, we test each one of our pieces of equipment before every election, and we have what's called a logic and accuracy test. We had that last Friday. That test is open to the public. We actually start at 0, prove that it starts at 0, move ballots through, and actually vote as if it were a real election, and we make sure that the election results are accurate. And so we did that test. It always comes out 100%, and we maintenance our equipment on a regular basis. You know, the state of Florida is a paper-based voting system, and so paper's kind of infallible, but we do have some other checks and balances. There's a cartridge inside of the scanner that counts your votes. There's a tape that comes out of the back of that scanner, and then there's the paper ballot. We also here in Palm Beach County operate with mini iPads to check the voters in, and so we can compare the number of people who showed up to vote to the number of ballots that we have, to the number that's on the cartridge, to the number that's on the tape.
Florida, of course, the History 2000, the hanging chads, and you could see where some people, oh gosh, they're going to have problems. See that happen, but a difference between problems and a very close election and hanging chads and mechanical other problems and out and outright voter fraud.
Well,
or voter rigging.
We could have another very close election, and in Palm Beach County, that's very traditional, and that's not a problem.
That's a wholly different issue.
Whole different issue. You know, when somebody says that the election is rigged, it implies that the hardworking supervisors throughout the country are doing something to change the results, and that flat is just not true. And in fact, it's impossible because we have a paper system, and we have checks and balances, and the entire operation would really have to turn an election, and that's never happened in the history of the United States.
And you brought up a point, 67 counties in Florida. What Orange County's doing, what Bay County's doing, what Duval County's doing is their business. You run the Palm Beach County Elections Office. So there's 67 counties, tens of thousands of counties across the United States. Many of them, like the state of Florida, we have a Republican governor and Secretary of State. So the notion that somehow people are engaging in some kind of concerted voter fraud is to you
insulting. You know, I have a really hard-working crew of individuals, and they've been working 7 days a week, overtime, Saturdays and Sundays, to make sure that this election provides ease and access to our voters, that we have a clear and clean election that is verifiable, and we have, I think, a history in the 8 years that I've been there of providing accurate elections where people can count on the results. And I think it's unfair for any candidate to go out there and scare voters to their advantage for something that is flat not true and provable.
And when you say any candidate, be that a Republican or Democrat, you'd say the same thing, because we tend to, in this very heated election year, people are saying, aha, but And you're saying there is no but here.
It's any
Let
candidate.
the chips fall where they may on Election Day, depending on the voters' will.
Absolutely. You know what? Our doors are open for every voter in Palm Beach County to avail themselves either of early voting, which starts on Monday, or absentee ballots, which we have a great number of them now, or to actually just go show up at their polling place on Election Day.
Let me ask you this. What kind of concerns are being brought to you based on a lot of the publicity about this charge in the last few weeks, if you can give us a sense of that?
We're getting a lot of calls from individuals that just have some questions.
Sure.
And, you know, I answer those questions directly. I have an assistant that answers those questions. And we want to talk to voters who have concern. We want to explain to them, like we're explaining to you today, how the system works, what the checks and balances are, so that it allays their concerns and they feel confident when they're going out to cast a ballot. We work really hard to provide public education, and I think we've done a good job here in Palm Beach County. And I can assure the voters that if they have any kind of concerns, they just need to call the office, speak to me, speak to my assistant, and we'd be happy to walk them through the process. And in fact, the process is open to the public. We have a large warehouse and it's very transparent. You can watch us as we're counting ballots and as we're working. And in fact, there's cameras that roll, motion cameras, in every one of our facilities so that if anybody has any question, they can watch it on video.
And there are provisions in place in backup, as you said, in terms of the backup of the record in case the vote is close. There are rules in place in the state of Florida. We saw them in 2000, but they are there if the vote's close for a recount or automatic recount. Those are all clearly articulated things in Florida law.
Absolutely. You know, after the 2000 election, I sat on the Ethics and Elections Committee in Tallahassee as a state rep, where we completely revamped the election laws in the state of Florida. And I'm very confident that the chain of control has been established and the historic way that everybody is conducting elections has been proven to be infallible. If the cartridges fail for any...
Infallible is a big word now.
Infallible is a big word, but you know what? Paper ballots are countable. And so you can't really fake a paper ballot. And so you can't fudge what's on paper. And so we have actually been able to have a post-election audit that's required in law now after every single election, where you choose precincts at random, you hand count the ballots, and you compare to the totals that you reported to Tallahassee. And fortunately, our audits always come out 100% because paper doesn't lie.
Finally, early voting. We're on the eve of early voting. Talk about what your sense might be of expectation of turnout and how many locations you have, all of which can be found on your website and ours, but give us a little sense of that.
We have 15 early voting sites. They will be open on Monday, October 24th through November 6th from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. daily. Any one of the voters in Palm Beach County can go to any one of those locations and present a current picture signature ID like your driver's license. Florida has a very liberal ID. We have 11 different IDs available that you can present, and we'll print you a ballot and you can take care of voting early.
Go ahead and give them your website, and you don't have to rush for a pen right now. We're going to repeat it. We're going to have it on our website, but go ahead and name your website to go find the sites.
Website is pbcelections.org. pbcelections.org, and it's right on the homepage. Just click on early voting sites and you'll find the one that's most convenient to you.
Would it be fair to say that your fellow election supervisors are speaking with the same vigor about the election and about the efforts always to make sure this election, as always, is one that we all can have complete faith in? You've spoken with great passion about it here. I assume that's reflective of what your fellow election supervisors around the region and state and country are saying as well?
Absolutely. You know, in every interview that I've seen, every supervisor of elections is explaining the process so that we can allay the fears of our voters and they can feel confident when they're casting their ballot that every vote counts and every ballot is very precious to each one of the supervisors that operate in a business like I do.
If Donald Trump walked in right now, what would you say to Mr. Trump about his concerns and the charge that he keeps leveling?
Well, I think that I would try and explain to him how the process works, because clearly he's not educated on how that works.
And you're ready to go and ready to have a robust turnout for Election Day and early voting day. And we, of course, will be at the nerve center of it all, election headquarters, on election night, which is going to be here before we know it. I know you're working long and hard. We thank you for coming in, giving us some of your time, going through the process. We appreciate it a great deal.
Thank you very much for having me.
Our pleasure. Thank you. Susan Booker, the Palm Beach County Supervisor of Election. Coming up next, the showdown in the race for the U.S. Senate, among other topics in Florida. Now for our roundtable with Brian Crowley, author of CrowleyPoliticalReport.com, and Kevin Wagner, political science professor at Florida Atlantic University. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. The first U.S. Senate debate between incumbent Republican Marco Rubio out of Miami and his Democratic challenger, local Congressman Patrick Murphy, representing Treasure Coast and parts of Palm Beach County. They argued on a lot of topics. Let's listen in on part of one.
You were the champion of comprehensive immigration reform. And then what happened? You decided to run for president. So you flip-flopped on that issue. And you now don't support a pathway to citizenship. You no longer support those dreamers. And if that's not bad enough, you've doubled down on your endorsement of Donald Trump, the man who wants to build a wall, who thinks that Mexicans are rapists and criminals, who wants to deport 11 to 12 million people, and that's who you're supporting? Senator, it's shocking that you continue to put your own political ambition in front of what's best for Florida and these immigrants.
If I may respond, first of all, Congressman Murphy, you've never even been involved in the immigration reform issue. You only started talking about it like 4 weeks ago. You might have signed on to some letters, maybe had a Facebook page. Your involvement on it's been zero. Number two, I'm not sure if you've informed people that in 2013 you voted for the Homeland Security Bill to restart deportations of Dreamers. And number three, you talk about flip-flop. Congressman Murphy, in December of 2011, you changed your name, you changed your party, and you moved from South Beach to West Palm Beach to run for Congress. That's not a flip-flop, that's a metamorphosis.
Your take about the state of play in the Florida Senate race, the debate. We'll talk a bit more about it in a moment, but your early thought and take.
Well, you know, Murphy did okay in the debate. I mean, he was up against somebody who has done many, many debates and was in the big leagues in all those presidential debates. So, you know, Murphy just had to sort of hold his own, and I think he did okay. I don't think he did great, but I think he did okay. You know, I wrote for Crowley Political Report last week that, you know, perhaps Hillary Clinton can help drag Patrick Murphy over the finish line because the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee and other organizations are not financially supporting Murphy's campaign
Even
anymore.
with a race that's now within a couple of points, according to some polls?
I think, well, some polls have suggested it's tightened, and it may have, but we don't know why it's tightening. Maybe Kevin will know why it's tightening. It could be because a lot of Republicans are just dropping out of the race. I mean, voters.
First, your overall take on the race, the state of play of the race between these two?
Yeah, the polling suggests consistently that Rubio's been out ahead. It's been a small, but it's been a pretty steady lead. And when you look at polling, you try to ignore the outliers, the ones where there are big or small differences that change very, very rapidly. But if you look at the general pattern, Rubio's had a pretty consistently solid lead in this race for a while.
How does polling and or your gut and your experience suggest this calculus? The argument is the big worry on Capitol Hill for Republicans is that the Trump effect could be negative for Democrats. U.S. Senate might lose control. The House, they hope to pick up a lot of seats, if not gain an outright majority. And in this debate, if you listen to it, much of Murphy's arguments seem to be that you support Donald Trump. And much of Marco's is you don't have experience or background. How much will the Trump-Clinton effect play into that sense of where the polls are going and the down ballot part of these tickets?
Yeah, this is a very interesting
historically
year.
and this year.
It's a very interesting year for the term we use is called coattails, which is whether the top of the ticket will pull the bottom of the ticket along. But the best way to think about it is in terms of voter excitement and turnout. If the people are very excited about the top of the ticket, if Democrats are excited, they'll turn out in higher numbers, and that could generate a few point difference that could help Murphy. The key here is that he has to really be close enough for those few points to make a difference. And you know, some of the more recent polling has suggested it's tighter, but you know, Rubio's had a consistent lead, so Murphy really has to have that tight race and see if the top of the ticket can pull him through. But you know, it's hard to tell at this point.
Brian?
You know, an interesting thing that I think, and I'd be interested to see if Kevin agrees, that has, I think, an impact on the polling that's done is, as of Friday, there have already been more than 1 million votes cast in Florida, cast by mail. And of that number, about 417,000 were Republicans and about 400,000 Democrats. Normally, the Republicans have a much higher lead, but I mean, think about that. During the last few weeks of polling, I don't know that the polls, you know, they usually poll likely voters, but we've got 1 million people who have gone beyond likely voters. They voted. So I don't know what impact that has on the polls, but it would seem to me it would put some question on some of the polls that we now see in Florida.
Yeah, it's a good question. The way we deal with that issue is we actually ask people if they voted, right? And if they voted, then obviously they fit into the likely voter category. We expect them to vote, they voted. So that obviously counts. I think the key really here, though, Brian pointed out, early voting is generally, mail-in early voting is generally a very favorable favorable for Republicans. We expect at this time last year about a 4-point lead for Republicans. The fact that Democrats are running basically even is actually a very good sign for Democrats. Democrats actually do considerably better at in-person early voting, is where they tend to rack up the numbers. So this is actually not a great sign for Republicans.
And to your point, whether that enthusiasm, whatever it portends, goes down ballot will be the question. I couldn't help but watch the debate. To some extent, you feel that the major issues we face in Florida about development and the like, and concerns about climate change and so on and so forth, about the tax base in Florida, all the things that traditionally you expect them to talk about, almost seems like any immigration, we're window dressing for whether you're a sufficient proxy or not for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. And that to me is going to be the fascinating exit poll question to ask up and down ballot. Is that your sense?
One of the hardest things, especially in a presidential year, is for any down ballot races to get a lot of oxygen. Almost always the top of the ballot stuff dominates the conversation.
But here, so much of the conversation between the candidates was about Clinton and Trump, as though they really have decided, not just in this state, to roll all of their dice on, I'm Republican, you're Democrat, how do you feel about Trump or Hillary Clinton? Will decide it in a more profound way than you sometimes have seen.
That's definitely true, but we always have to remember, historically, partisan identification is still your best predictor of voting patterns. So if I only get one question to ask you, I ask you your party, that'll tell me more about who you're going to vote for than anything else I can ask. The key here is if Hillary Clinton motivates Democrats to turn out, and if Republicans are turned off by Donald Trump, those Democrats are coming to the poll, and the vast majority of them are going to vote for down ballot Democrats. And that's why Murphy has a chance even with these numbers.
So for all the craziness of this year, you believe that historical trend will hold up well in this cycle as well, or likely to?
Yeah, I don't think there's very much that's going to divorce us from our partisan voting trends.
I'm nervous with. I never predict elections, as you know. I just refuse to do it, and I'm not going to.
You don't. He doesn't. We don't. Let's be very clear about that.
But even if somebody held a gun to my head to try to make me to predict this election, I'm a little leery of historical at this point, because this is such a crazy election. We've never had a candidate in my lifetime like Donald Trump, and I think perhaps one of the things that will throw out history a bit could be people who just decide not to vote, could be people who party switch, could be people who vote at the top of the ballot but don't vote down ballot. And just as an aside, let me note that, because I don't want to make it sound like I think Patrick Murphy's in deep, deep trouble, but Hillary Clinton and President Obama have both gone out of their way to campaign for Patrick Murphy. And if Florida suddenly turns into a big Hillary Clinton state, I think that could help Patrick Murphy enormously. But I am a little nervous about historical perspective at this point, because I think we're in a unique time.
10 seconds
real quick. Nobody's talking about this, but the fact that the Trump organization doesn't have the traditional strength of the ground game in the state could mean 2 or 3 points for Democratic candidates, even down ballot.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of moving parts here.
Right.
Indeed there are. Coming up, we've got 2 of the best to help us look at it. Next, a look at the most contested race for Congress in our area in a moment. It's pretty hard to miss the ads for the race in Congressional District 18, including St. Lucie, Martin, and parts of Palm Beach County. Republican Brian Mast, Democrat Randy Perkins, both have been guests on this broadcast, have been attacking each other heavily and often on the airwaves. It appears the presidential contest, no surprise here, could well have some impact on their race. They were both asked in a debate last week who they thought should be president.
I can tell you that Hillary Clinton has been party to leaving one of my personal friends, Chris Paranto, or people know him as Chris Tonto Paranto, leaving him for dead in Benghazi. And when I think about her wearing the hat of Commander-in-Chief and all my friends that are still on the battlefield today, that's not something that I can ever allow to happen. Beyond that, I think that she's wrong in terms of Iran, wrong in terms of Gitmo, wrong in terms of immigration, wrong in terms of so many other issues that are affecting the direction of this country, and it's for that reason that Donald Trump will still have my support today.
I am voting for Hillary Clinton, and I believe she will be the best commander-in-chief. I believe she will bring our jobs back. She will strengthen our economy. She will protect our national security interests. But I don't know how you could vote for a man who vilifies women, who promotes sexual assault on girls as young as 10 years old, who degrades women, who ranks them on a system of 1 to 10. To me, it's about character, moral character.
And so, once again, in a race where you have plenty of big local issues, not least among them the horrible algae crisis, still dealing with the aftermath of that, and so many other issues going on in our part of the state, this race in many ways being defined by your support for president. Not surprising, typical season that a Republican says, I'm going to vote for Trump, although there have been defections, or a Democrat would say Clinton. And yet, Your take on that, to pick up on the conversation we had, how this is very much in such in a way I've not seen, really defining the races below the top of the ticket.
I think part of what drives a lot of these races is because of the way the districts are drawn, because of gerrymandering, because of the way the populations are settled, there's actually not that many competitive congressional districts. And so for the ones that are competitive, there's a lot of national money that comes into those campaigns, and they bring with them a lot of national baggage with them. So it's not surprising to me at all that these issues are showing up at the congressional level. These are the issues that people are hearing about. These are the issues that are on television.
Do you think those will drive voters more than their takes on things like, for instance, what they do to avoid the next major algae crisis? Do you think that's going to be top of mind, or this visceral, how do you feel about the top of the ticket, therefore that's how I feel about you, and I'm going to vote first you, then Brian?
Yeah, I think some of the issues, because they're so important and they're so big and they've been so dominant in the press in the local areas, are going to drive more votes than are typical in a congressional election. So this is actually going to be interesting to see how those issues actually balance out.
Brian?
I think, you know, I mean, obviously, if you're the Democrat and you have a candidate like Trump, you know, you want to link the two of them together, because Trump has said some outrageous things, and you know, I don't know whether or not it's going to work for Trump in the long run. People look at me sometimes like I'm nuts because I say, well, Trump could still win, yeah, I think, and I think that if I were a Democratic candidate, I would certainly try to link my opponent as best I could to Trump, especially somebody who has said that they support Trump despite all the various accusations with women and all the other, you know, issues that we normally don't see in an election cycle.
That will allow us to segue into directly final thoughts and takes about the state of the race at the top of the ticket. It's been, to say the least, quite a week, quite a debate. Your take on what we've been hearing in the campaign from Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and just your kind of snapshot look at the top of this race and ticket.
Yeah, we polled it a couple weeks ago, and we're in the field now with another poll in Florida, so we'll have a better look at it. The trend line has definitely been towards Hillary Clinton, and what political science tells us actually is that October polling tends to be, especially mid to late October polling, tends to be pretty predictive of how November goes. Not always, but pretty predictive.
And we want to be clear, the polling you're doing is across our state,
right.
Florida specific. Brian, your thoughts as we look at the headline race, the top of the ticket here heading into the home stretch?
Well, first off, I hope that on election night that everything goes very smoothly in Florida. We've already had sort of a signal that things could be a problem in Broward County. There's a lawsuit been filed because the marijuana initiative, constitutional amendment, was omitted on some of the absentee ballots. Those kinds of mistakes help rig elections. And we can only hope that not only do things go very smoothly in Florida, and I think they probably will, but that should Trump lose, that he do it gracefully and not cause the kind of turmoil that could turn our democracy, but create a crisis for our democracy.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll have closing comments in a moment. A reminder, WPTV will host the only primetime debate among the candidates in Congress in District 18. I'll be moderating that. It's coming up Friday, 8 p.m., right here on News Channel 5. We'll be back in just a moment. Closing comments, political wags.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up a little bit on what we were talking about. FAU is going into the field right now. Actually, as we're talking right now, we have a poll in the field on Florida. We're looking at both the Senate race, the presidential race. In our polling, the trend line has been for Hillary Clinton. It should be interesting to see whether or not Trump can stabilize his numbers. Florida, again, the key state for this election.
All right, thanks so much. And the Crowley closer.
I think that Floridians should think carefully about the way we almost every other year amend the Constitution of the state. Very often, as we're seeing with Amendment 1, the solar amendment, the amendments are entitled to protect a private industry, in this case the big energy companies like FP&L. But more importantly, often these amendments are the result of the legislature failing to act on a variety of issues, so people feel like they need to push a constitutional amendment. We need to be careful the way we keep changing our competition for what should be issues that should not be in the Constitution.
And one note on that, since we touched on Amendment 1, and we'll talk about the medical marijuana on a later broadcast, constitutional amendments require 60% of the vote for passage, and that's worth making that reminder here at the end of this broadcast. Gentlemen, as always, thanks for your expertise. We'll keep your hot seats close because you'll be with us a lot in the next few weeks. Thank you for spending time with us on today's To The Point. If you'd like to send a comment about the broadcast, please go to WPTV.com and click on our To The Point page. As always, we wish you and yours a great day and a great week.